The unsettling delivery. The sun had barely risen over Atlanta, casting long golden shadows across the city streets, as Marcus Andrews pulled his delivery truck into the FedEx depot. The summer heat was already building, promising another blistering day. Marcus, a seasoned driver at 43, enjoyed these quiet early mornings. The clatter of loading carts and the hum of trucks created a rhythm he found comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos the day would inevitably bring. "Morning, Miss Beverly," he called out, tipping his cap toward the depot supervisor. Beverly, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp wit and a soft heart, waved him off with a smile. "You're too early again, Marcus. One of these days, you're going to realize you're not invincible." He chuckled, loading his truck with practiced ease. "Can't help it. Early bird gets the worm, or in my case, the cooler roads." Beverly shook her head, mumbling something about stubborn men as she disappeared into her office. Marcus loaded the last of his packages, took a sip of coffee from his thermos, and glanced at his route for the day. It looked like a standard mix of residential stops, with 1 or 2 commercial addresses thrown in. The kind of day he could handle on autopilot. The streets of Cedar Grove came alive as Marcus made his rounds. His first stop was a familiar one, a quaint house with a flower-filled porch belonging to the Chens, an elderly couple who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. "Morning, Marcus." Mrs. Chen greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, holding out a Tupperware container. "We made too many dumplings again. You'll help us, won't you?" He laughed, accepting the container. "You're going to spoil me, Mrs. Chen." "Nonsense," her husband chimed in. "A strong man needs good food." The interaction was brief but warm, a reminder of why Marcus loved this route. He enjoyed the small moments of connection, the faces that had become as familiar as the landmarks of his hometown. At the Rodriguez house, the kids squealed with delight when they heard his truck pull up. It had become a tradition for Marcus to honk twice as he drove by, a simple gesture that never failed to brighten their morning. Their mother, Elena, stood in the doorway with a grateful smile as she accepted her package. "You're like a superhero to them, you know," she said. Marcus grinned. "Just doing my job." By late morning, Marcus found himself driving down Maple Street, a quieter part of his route he rarely visited. The houses here were older, many of them showing signs of neglect. His GPS directed him to 2487 Maple Street, a small, dilapidated home at the end of the block. The address was new to him, and as he parked in front of the house, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. The yard was overgrown, the grass tall enough to obscure scattered toys and debris. A rusty swing set creaked in the breeze, its once bright colors now faded and chipped. The house itself was in worse shape. The paint peeled from the siding, and one of the windows was cracked, covered by a tattered blanket. The deflated basketball lay abandoned in the dirt, its presence a silent testament to the kind of life that might have once thrived here. Marcus double-checked the package in his hands. It was small and light, addressed to a James Wilson. He made his way up the cracked walkway, his boots crunching on loose gravel. As he approached the door, he noticed more details that set his nerves on edge. A broken porch light, the faint smell of mildew wafting from the house. He rang the doorbell. The chime echoed hollowly inside, but no one came to the door. He waited a moment, then knocked, louder this time. "Hello, delivery for James Wilson." Still nothing. Marcus sighed, crouching to set the package down. He was just straightening up when he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned toward the cracked window, but the blanket hanging over it didn't move. Frowning, he scanned the yard again. That's when he noticed a child's bike lying on its side near the steps, its handlebars bent, and its paint scratched. A small purple hair ribbon was caught in the weeds near the bike. Something felt wrong. Marcus stepped back onto the walkway, his instincts screaming at him to leave, but his feet refused to move. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind, as it often did in moments like this. "God gave you instincts for a reason. Trust them, baby. He turned toward the house one last time, scanning it for any sign of life. That's when he heard it. A faint sound, so soft he almost missed it. A whisper. "Help me." The voice was small, trembling with fear, and unmistakably a child's. Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a cautious step closer to the door. "Hello," he called out, his voice low but steady. "Is someone there?" There was a long silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the yard. Then he heard it again, clearer this time. "Please, don't leave." The word sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He leaned closer to the door, his hand resting on the frame. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm here. Are you hurt?" The voice hesitated before answering, barely audible. I can't open the door. Daddy locked it." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He glanced at the windows again, searching for any sign of the child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily." "How old are you, Lily?" 7. Marcus's grip tightened on the doorframe. He could hear the fear in her voice, and it was tearing him apart. "Lily, is your daddy home?" "He's upstairs. He's mad." Marcus exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He couldn't just walk away, but he also couldn't risk putting Lily in more danger by escalating the situation. He crouched by the door, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Listen, Lily, I'm going to get you some help, okay? But I need you to stay quiet and safe. Can you do that for me?" There was a pause, then a soft, trembling, "Okay." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his hand shaking as he pressed the buttons. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Marcus Andrews. I'm a FedEx driver making a delivery at 2487 Maple Street. There's a child locked inside. Her name is Lily. She says her father's upstairs, and he's been drinking. I think she's in danger." The dispatcher's tone became more urgent. "Are you in a safe location?" "I'm outside the house, but I can hear her through the door. She sounds terrified." "Stay where you are, sir. Officers are on their way. Can you keep the child calm and stay on the line?" "I'll do my best." Marcus turned back to the door, his heart aching for the little girl trapped inside. "Lily," he whispered, "I'm still here, okay? Help is coming. You're not alone." For a moment, there was silence. Then Lily's voice, small and fragile, came through the door again. "Promise." Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. "I promise, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." A whisper in the darkness. Marcus knelt by the door, his heart heavy with the weight of Lily's voice in his ears. The heat pressed down like a physical force, but he barely noticed. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to kick the door down, to do something. But he knew any rash action could put Lily in more danger. "Lily, can you tell me where you are inside the house? Are you near the door?" he asked softly. A faint reply came through the crack. "I'm under the table in the kitchen. Daddy can't see me here." Marcus clenched his jaw, imagining the terror this little girl must have been living with. "That's a good spot," he assured her. "You're doing great. Just stay right there." Above him, he heard the faint creak of footsteps. He froze, his eyes darting toward the house. The sound was uneven, heavy. Someone was moving upstairs, and by the way the footsteps stumbled, it was clear they weren't sober. "Lily," Marcus whispered, keeping his voice calm. "Can you tell me how many locks are on the door? Are they high up where you can't reach them?" There was a pause before she answered, her words trembling. "There's 3. Daddy puts a chain at the top. I can't get it." Marcus exhaled slowly. The image of her small hands struggling to reach those locks sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through him. He looked around the porch, scanning for any sign of a spare key or a way to force the door quietly. But the house was a fortress of neglect, every entrance locked or blocked. He couldn't risk making noise, and alerting her father. "Stay under the table, Lily. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe, okay?" "Okay," she whispered. Marcus turned his attention to the phone, where the dispatcher's steady voice came through. "Sir, officers are en route and should be there within 5 minutes. Can you hear anything from inside the house?" He hesitated, listening. The heavy footsteps upstairs had stopped, replaced by the faint sound of glass breaking. Marcus tightened his grip on the phone. "He's upstairs breaking something. I think he's drunk." "Do you see any weapons?" "No, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has one. The house is in bad shape, and the girl said he gets violent when he drinks." "Stay put, sir. Officers are trained to handle these situations." Marcus wanted to argue, but he bit his tongue. He wasn't trained for this. He was a delivery driver, for God's sake. But the thought of leaving Lily alone in that house, even for a second, was unbearable. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. Marcus kept talking to Lily, his voice soft and steady, doing his best to keep her calm. He asked her about her favorite color, her favorite food, anything to distract her from the fear. "I like macaroni and cheese," she said. "Mommy used to make it for me. She put little hot dogs in it." Marcus smiled despite the tension. "That sounds delicious. My grandma used to make me spaghetti with meatballs. She always said the secret was extra garlic." Lily giggled, a sound so small and fragile it nearly broke his heart. "Mommy liked garlic too. She said it was good for you." "She sounds like a wonderful mom," Marcus said gently. "Do you remember the flowers she used to grow? You told me about them earlier." "Yeah," Lily whispered, her voice growing softer. "Purple ones. They smelled really nice. Daddy doesn't let me go outside to see them anymore. He says the garden is dead." Marcus's throat tightened. This child had lost so much, her mother, her freedom, her safety, and yet she still held on to these small, beautiful memories. The sound of a bottle shattering upstairs snapped Marcus out of his thoughts. He stiffened, his eyes darting to the windows. James Wilson's voice boomed through the house, slurred and angry. "Lily, where are you?" Marcus felt a surge of panic. He leaned closer to the door, his voice urgent but calm. "Lily, stay quiet. Don't make a sound. Okay?" "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus heard the heavy footsteps again, descending the stairs this time. James was muttering to himself, his words incoherent. Marcus pressed himself against the wall beside the door, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. The dispatcher's voice came through again. "Sir, officers are less than 2 minutes out. Can you see the suspect?" "No," Marcus replied in a low voice. "But I can hear him. He's coming down the stairs." The footsteps grew louder, closer, until Marcus could hear James pacing just on the other side of the door. He held his breath, his muscles tense. Through the crack, he caught a glimpse of the man. A tall, broad-shouldered figure with disheveled hair and a stained t-shirt. He was holding a bottle of beer, which he slammed down on a nearby table. James muttered something unintelligible, then shouted, "Lily, you better not be hiding from me again." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. His instincts screamed at him to act, but he forced himself to stay still. The sound of approaching sirens finally reached his ears, a faint but growing promise of help. James's head snapped up at the sound. He stumbled toward the front window, pulling back the tattered blanket to peer outside. His face twisted in anger as he spotted the police cruisers rounding the corner. "What the hell?" he muttered, dropping the beer bottle. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't seem to notice. Marcus turned back to the phone. "The police are here," he told the dispatcher. "He's seen them. Stay where you are, sir. Officers will handle it." 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing but sirens off. 4 officers emerged, moving quickly but cautiously toward the house. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, approached Marcus. "Marcus Andrews?" she asked. He nodded. "That's me." The little girl, Lily, is inside. She's under the table in the kitchen. Her father is in the living room. He's drunk and agitated." The officer nodded, signaling to her team. Two officers moved to the back of the house while she and her partner approached the front door. "Mr. Wilson, this is the police," she called out, her voice firm. "We need you to open the door." Inside, James cursed loudly. "Get off my property," he shouted. "Mr. Wilson, we just want to talk. Open the door so we can make sure everyone's okay." Marcus's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold. He glanced toward the window, where he could see James pacing, his movements erratic. Suddenly, James grabbed a chair and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, and he leaned out, shouting at the officers, "Get out of here. I didn't call you." The lead officer motioned for Marcus to step back. "Stay behind the truck," she instructed. "We'll handle this." Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting toward the house. "What about Lily?" he asked. "She's terrified." "We'll get her out safely," the officer promised. Reluctantly, Marcus retreated to his truck, his hands shaking as he watched the officers surround the house. His heart was in his throat, every nerve on edge. Inside, James continued shouting, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. The officers remained calm, their movements deliberate. Marcus could see them positioning themselves at the doors and windows, ready to act. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Then, with a loud crash, the officers breached the front door, disappearing into the house. Marcus held his breath, his fists clenched at his sides. He could hear the commotion inside, shouting, the sound of furniture being overturned, heavy footsteps echoing through the halls. And then, a small voice pierced through the chaos. "Marcus." It was Lily. Her cry was faint but unmistakable, and it sent a surge of determination through him. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the house. "Hang on, Lily," he thought. "You're almost safe." A desperate rescue. The chaos inside the house felt like a living thing, loud and erratic, reverberating through the walls. Marcus stood frozen by his truck, every instinct screaming for him to charge inside. He had promised Lily he wouldn't leave her. And now, even with the police present, he felt as though that promise might slip through his fingers. "Stay calm, Marcus," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the shouts and crashes. "They know what they're doing." But then he heard her again, her voice breaking through the noise, faint but filled with terror. "Marcus, help me." Inside the house, the officers moved swiftly. Sergeant Rivera, the lead officer, motioned her team toward the living room, where James Wilson was pacing erratically. He clutched a broken bottle in one hand, its jagged edges glinting in the dim light. The smell of alcohol hung heavy in the air, mixed with the stale scent of neglect. "Mr. Wilson," Rivera called, her voice firm but calm. "Put the bottle down. We're here to help." James whirled around, his bloodshot eyes wide with anger. "Help? You think I need help? I don't need you people in my house." He gestured wildly with the bottle, the movement making the officers tense. "Let's talk, James," Rivera continued, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "We're not here to hurt you. Let's make sure everything's okay." James sneered. "Everything's fine. I don't need you here. Get out." Rivera's partner, Officer Hughes, edged closer to the stairs, scanning the dimly lit space. "Where's the girl, James?" he asked, his tone measured. "Is Lily upstairs?" James laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Lily? That kid's fine. She's quiet, like I told her to be." Rivera's eyes flicked toward the kitchen, where a small, trembling figure was crouched under the table. She caught a glimpse of wide, terrified eyes peeking out from behind a chair leg. Rivera held up a hand, silently signaling to the other officers. "James, let's sit down and talk," she said, keeping his focus on her. "We just want to make sure everyone's safe." Outside, Marcus couldn't take it anymore. The sound of Lily's voice pleading for him to help gnawed at his every thought. He stepped away from the truck, moving toward the house despite the dispatcher's warnings still echoing in his mind. "Sir, stay outside. The officers are trained to handle this." But Marcus wasn't thinking about training. He was thinking about Lily, hungry, scared, and hiding under a table in a house that felt like a cage. He couldn't leave her in there alone. Lily curled into a ball under the table, clutching her knees to her chest. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure her father could hear it. She had done what Marcus said. She had stayed quiet. But now, the shouting and crashing were getting closer. She wanted to believe that the police would save her, but every time she heard her father's voice, her fear grew. "Marcus," she whispered again, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't leave." She imagined the purple blanket Marcus had told her about, the one with butterflies that protected her. She wrapped herself in that thought, holding onto it like a lifeline. Somewhere in the noise and chaos, she thought she heard Marcus's voice again, distant but steady. Inside, Rivera edged closer to the kitchen, keeping James's attention firmly on her. "Why don't you put the bottle down, James? It's not safe to hold something like that. Let's talk this through." James jabbed the bottle toward her, his movements jerky and unstable. "You think I don't know what you're doing. You're trying to trick me. But I'm not stupid." "No one's saying you are, James," Rivera said evenly. "We just want to make sure your daughter is okay." James's face twisted with rage. "She's fine. She doesn't need anyone but me. I'm her father." Hughes took another step toward the stairs, his eyes scanning the second floor for any signs of danger. He spotted a shattered picture frame on the landing, the glass glittering in the faint light. The photograph inside was of a woman, her features delicate and strikingly similar to Lily's. It didn't take much to piece together that this was Lily's mother, the one she had whispered about to Marcus. "James," Hughes said, his tone softer now. "You've been through a lot, haven't you? Losing your wife. It must have been hard." James flinched at the mention of his wife, his grip on the bottle tightening. "Don't you talk about her. You don't know anything." "We know it hurts," Hughes continued, taking another step. "And sometimes, when we're hurting, we don't always make the best choices. But you love Lily, don't you? You want what's best for her." James's shoulders sagged slightly, the anger in his eyes flickering into something else, something like grief. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, Marcus was at the door now, pressing his ear to the crack. He could hear the officers talking, their voices calm but firm. He could also hear James, his words slurred and erratic. Marcus's fists clenched as he imagined the fear Lily must be feeling. "Hang on, Lily," he murmured. "Just hang on." Then he heard it, a soft creak, followed by a muffled sob. It was Lily. "Marcus," she whispered, so faint he could barely hear her. "I'm scared." "I'm here, Lily," he whispered back, his voice breaking. "I'm not going anywhere." Rivera moved closer to the table, her eyes never leaving James. "Let's make sure Lily's okay, James. She needs you to be strong for her." James's grip on the bottle faltered, his arm dropping slightly. For a moment, it seemed like he might listen. But then one of the officers at the back of the house moved too quickly, and James's eyes snapped to the motion. His rage returned with full force. "You're trying to take her from me," he roared, raising the bottle again. Rivera reacted instantly. "James, stop. Don't do this." But he was already moving, his steps unsteady but determined, heading straight for the kitchen. Rivera surged forward, her partner close behind. "Lily, stay down," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Lily froze as her father's footsteps thundered toward her. She clutched her knees tighter, her body trembling. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like jelly. She squeezed her eyes shut, imagining the purple blanket again, the butterflies fluttering around her, shielding her from harm. "Lily," James bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. "Where are you?" Outside, Marcus heard the commotion escalate. His body moved before his mind could catch up, and he found himself pounding on the door. "Lily," he shouted, his voice raw. "I'm here." The sound of his voice broke through Lily's fear like a beacon. She opened her eyes, her small voice calling out, "Marcus." James froze at the sound, his wild eyes darting toward the door. "Who the hell is that?" he demanded, stumbling back. Rivera seized the moment. She and Hughes rushed forward, disarming James in a swift, practiced motion. The bottle clattered to the floor as he was restrained, shouting incoherently. Marcus didn't wait for permission. The moment he heard James subdued, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house smelled of alcohol and decay, but his focus was on one thing: finding Lily. "Lily," he called, his eyes scanning the room. "Here." Her tiny voice came from under the table. He dropped to his knees, peering under the worn wooden surface. There she was, small, pale, and trembling, her wide eyes filled with tears. Without thinking, he reached out his arms. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." She hesitated for only a moment before crawling out and throwing herself into his arms. She clung to him tightly, her little body shaking as she sobbed into his chest. "I was so scared," she whispered. Marcus held her close, his own tears threatening to fall. "I know, Lily. I know. But you're safe now. I've got you." Rivera approached, her expression softening as she saw Marcus holding Lily. "We'll get her checked out," she said gently. "Make sure she's okay." Marcus nodded, his arms still around Lily. "You're going to be okay," he whispered to her. "I promise." For the first time, she looked up at him, her tear-streaked face showing the faintest hint of a smile. "Thank you, Marcus." And in that moment, he knew he had kept his promise. A fragile trust. The police cruiser rolled away from the scene of 2487 Maple Street, leaving Marcus seated in the back with Lily cradled against his chest. She hadn't let go of him since he had pulled her from under the table, and he didn't have the heart to ask her to. Outside the window, the rundown houses of Maple Street blurred past, their peeling paint and sagging porches a silent backdrop to the storm of emotions raging in Marcus's chest. Sergeant Rivera drove, glancing at Marcus through the rearview mirror. "We're taking her to the hospital," she said, her tone professional but kind. "The doctors need to make sure she's okay. Physically, at least." Marcus nodded, his hand resting protectively on Lily's back. She had fallen silent since being carried out of the house, her small fingers clutching his shirt like a lifeline. He looked down at her pale face, her eyes wide and glassy, and felt a surge of anger that anyone could hurt a child like this. "What happens next?" he asked quietly. Rivera sighed. "Child Protective Services will get involved. She doesn't have anyone else listed as a guardian, if her father's found unfit. And from what we've seen, he will be. They'll start the process of placing her in foster care." Marcus's stomach tightened. He thought of Lily, so small and scared, being passed off to strangers. The idea didn't sit right with him, but he didn't say anything. What could he say? He was just a delivery driver who happened to be in the right, or wrong, place at the right time. At the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic greeted them as they entered the emergency room. A nurse led them to a private room, where Lily was gently coaxed onto a hospital bed. Marcus sat nearby, his hand resting on the armrest of his chair, ready to reach out if she needed him. Lily's eyes darted nervously around the room. "I don't want to stay here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus leaned forward, his voice soft but steady. "I know it's scary, but these people are here to help you. They're going to make sure you're healthy and strong." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want to be alone." "You won't be," Marcus promised. "I'll be right here." The nurse offered him a sympathetic look. It's unusual for someone who isn't family to stay, but given the circumstances, she trailed off, then nodded. "We'll make an exception." As the hours ticked by, Marcus stayed by Lily's side while the doctors examined her. They gently checked for injuries, carefully noting the bruises on her arms and legs, the faint scratches on her wrists. Marcus watched as Lily flinched at every touch, her body rigid with fear, his fists clenched at his sides, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "She's malnourished," one doctor said quietly, speaking to Sergeant Rivera outside the room. "Dehydrated too. It looks like she hasn't had a proper meal in days. The bruises are older, some of them weeks old." Marcus overheard the conversation, his jaw tightening. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind, as it often did in moments of doubt. When you can help someone, you help them. No excuses, no hesitation. Once the doctors had finished their examination, Lily curled up on the hospital bed, a thin blanket pulled tightly around her. Marcus pulled his chair closer, his presence a quiet reassurance. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are they going to take me away?" Marcus's heart ached at the fear in her words. "They're going to find a safe place for you, Lily. Somewhere you won't have to be scared anymore." Her lip quivered, and she looked down at her hands. "But what if they don't want me? Daddy says nobody wants me." Marcus swallowed hard, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "Lily, that's not true. None of this is your fault. You're smart and brave, and anyone would be lucky to have you." She didn't respond, but her small hand crept toward his, gripping his fingers tightly. As evening fell, Rivera returned with an update. "Her father's in custody. He's refusing to cooperate, but we have enough evidence to press charges. He won't be getting out anytime soon." Marcus nodded, relief mingled with anger. "And Lily? She'll be placed with a foster family once she's discharged. CPS is already working on it." The words hung heavy in the air. Marcus looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep, her small frame curled up like a question mark. He couldn't bear the thought of her being passed from one home to another, a stranger to everyone she met. "Can I visit her?" he asked suddenly. Rivera raised an eyebrow. "That's up to CPS, but it's rare for someone outside the family to stay involved." Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of his own childhood, losing his parents at 12 and being raised by his grandmother. She had been his anchor, his constant, in a world that had felt impossibly big and lonely. He couldn't let Lily feel that same loneliness. What if I could do more than visit?" he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "What if I could take care of her?" Rivera stared at him, surprised. "You mean foster her?" Marcus nodded. "Or whatever I need to do. I don't know how this works, but I can't just walk away. She needs someone." The surgeon studied him for a moment, then softened. "It's not an easy process, Marcus. There's a lot of paperwork, background checks, training. It could take months." "I don't care how long it takes," he said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next day, Marcus sat across from a CPS caseworker, a woman named Angela Hart. She had kind eyes, but a no-nonsense demeanor, and she didn't sugarcoat the situation. "Mr. Andrews, I admire your willingness to help," she began. "But fostering a child, especially one who's been through trauma like Lily, is a huge responsibility. It's not just about providing a roof over her head. She'll need therapy, stability, patience. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I know it won't be easy, but I've been where she is, losing people, feeling alone. My grandmother took me in when I had nowhere else to go, and she didn't know what she was doing either. But she loved me, and that was enough to get us through. I can do that for Lily." Angela studied him, her expression softening. "It's a long process," she said, "but if you're serious, I'll help you get started." For the next few days, Marcus was by Lily's side, as much as the hospital allowed. He brought her little things to brighten her day. A stuffed bear, a coloring book, her favorite purple flowers from a nearby florist. Slowly, she began to open up, her guarded demeanor giving way to glimpses of the vibrant child she had once been. "Marcus," she said one evening, her voice small but steady, Do you think Mommy can see me from heaven? He smiled gently, his throat tightening. I think she can, Lily. And I think she's really proud of you. Do you think she misses me? Every second, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But she knows you're strong, just like her. As the hospital prepared to discharge Lily, Marcus met with Angela again. She handed him a thick stack of paperwork. This is just the beginning, she said. But if you're willing to see it through, you might just change her life. Marcus took the papers, his resolve unwavering. She's already changed mine. Lily's small hand slipped into his, her wide eyes looking up at him with a mixture of hope and fear. Are you really going to stay with me? He crouched down, meeting her gaze. I promised I wouldn't leave you, didn't I? I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time since he had met her, Lily smiled, a real, genuine smile that made Marcus feel like the luckiest man in the world. The weight of the paperwork in Marcus's hands felt insignificant compared to the weight of the promise he had made to Lily. As Angela explained the next steps, background checks, home inspections, training courses, he nodded intently, committing every word to memory. Each step seemed daunting, but when he looked at Lily, sitting quietly with her stuffed bear clutched to her chest, he knew he wouldn't back down. Angela's voice softened as she caught his expression. You've already made a big difference for her, Marcus. Even if the process takes time, just knowing someone cares means everything to a child in her situation. Marcus glanced at Lily, who was cautiously drawing in the coloring book he brought her. Her strokes were tentative, as though she didn't trust the paper to hold her ideas. She needs more than someone who cares, he said firmly. She needs a home. A real one. Angela nodded, handing him a business card. We'll move as quickly as we can, but be prepared for challenges. Lily's been through a lot, and trust doesn't come easily for kids like her. If you ever feel overwhelmed, don't hesitate to reach out. Overwhelmed, Marcus said with a faint smile. I've delivered a grand piano to a fourth-floor apartment without an elevator. I think I can handle this. Angela chuckled but sobered quickly. This isn't a piano, Marcus. It's a life. That evening, Marcus stayed with Lily at the hospital until visiting hours ended. She had refused dinner at first, picking at the tray with disinterest, but Marcus coaxed her into eating a few bites by making silly faces. When she finally relented, he grinned and pretended to faint in exaggerated relief, earning a small giggle from her. That's more like it, he said, handing her a napkin. You're going to need your strength, kiddo. For what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For all the ice cream we're going to eat once you're out of here, he said with a wink. It's a scientific fact that ice cream fixes everything. Lily's smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. Daddy didn't let me have ice cream, she murmured. He said it was for good girls. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat, but he forced himself to stay calm. Well then, I guess we'll just have to break that rule, because I think you're the bravest, strongest kid I've ever met. That sounds like a good girl to me. Lily looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, and she nodded solemnly. Okay, but I like strawberry. Strawberry it is, Marcus promised. Back at home, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of paperwork. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of crickets chirping outside. He glanced around the room, suddenly seeing it through Lily's eyes. The small dining table with its mismatched chairs, the scuffed linoleum floor, the fridge covered in magnets and old photos. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and welcoming. He thought about the spare bedroom down the hall, currently filled with boxes and old furniture. It had been years since anyone had stayed in it, but he could already picture it transformed. A fresh coat of paint, maybe in purple, and a cozy bed with butterfly-patterned sheets. It wasn't much, but it could be hers, a place to call her own. Marcus picked up a pen and started filling out the forms. The questions were endless: employment history, financial stability, personal references, but he answered each one carefully, determined to prove he was capable of providing Lily with the stability she deserved. The next day, Marcus returned to the hospital to find Lily sitting up in bed, her stuffed bear perched on her lap. She looked brighter, though her eyes still carried the shadows of fear and uncertainty. "Morning, kiddo," he said, holding up a paper bag. "Guess what I brought?" She tilted her head curiously. "What?" He pulled out a small tub of strawberry ice cream and a plastic spoon. Her eyes lit up, and for the first time, she reached out for something without hesitation. "You kept your promise," she said softly, taking the spoon. "Always," Marcus replied, sitting down beside her. They ate the ice cream together in companionable silence, and for a moment, it felt like everything might actually be okay. Later that afternoon, Angela returned with an update. "We found a temporary placement for Lily with a foster family," she said. "They're experienced and come highly recommended." Lily stiffened, her small hands clutching the edge of the hospital bed. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go. I want to stay with Marcus." Angela crouched down to Lily's level, her voice gentle but firm. "I know this is scary, Lily, but this family is going to take good care of you while we work on finding something more permanent." Permanent. Lily's eyes darted to Marcus, panic flashing across her face. But Marcus stayed. Marcus knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "And I meant it, Lily. I'm working on making that happen. But until I can, you'll need to stay with this family. It's just for a little while, okay?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "What if you forget about me? What if you don't come back?" Marcus's heart broke at the desperation in her voice. He leaned in, his hands gently cupping her tiny shoulders. "Listen to me, Lily. That's never going to happen. I'm not going anywhere, remember. I'll visit you as often as I can, and I'll call you every day if they let me. You're not alone anymore, okay? I promise." "Promise," she whispered. "Promise," he said firmly. The goodbye at the hospital was one of the hardest moments of Marcus's life. As Lily was led away by Angela, her tearful gaze never leaving his, he felt a pang of helplessness that cut deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Back at home, he stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom, the paperwork in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. He had work to do, and he wasn't going to waste a single moment. "Hang on, Lily," he said softly. "I'm coming for you." Building a bridge. The weeks following Lily's placement in foster care were a whirlwind of preparation, uncertainty, and determination for Marcus. Each day started early and ended late, filled with work, meetings, and a growing list of tasks to turn his home into a sanctuary for the little girl he had promised to protect. The paperwork process was grueling. Background checks, home inspections, and mandatory training courses were just the beginning. Marcus had never been one to shy away from hard work, but this was different. Every question asked of him, every hoop he had to jump through, felt like a personal challenge to prove that he was capable of giving Lily the life she deserved. The first visit. 2 weeks after Lily had been placed in foster care, Marcus was granted permission to visit her. He arrived at the foster home, a modest, well-kept house in a quiet neighborhood, clutching a small gift bag with a butterfly-shaped hair clip and a box of crayons. It wasn't much, but he hoped it would bring a smile to her face. Angela met him at the door. "She's been adjusting," she said, her tone neutral. "But she's had some tough moments. It's normal for children in her situation to struggle with trust." Marcus nodded, his chest tightening. "Can I see her?" Angela gestured for him to follow. They walked through the house to the backyard, where Lily sat on a swing, her head down, her hands gripping the chains tightly. She was dressed in a simple yellow sundress, but she looked smaller and more fragile than Marcus remembered. "Lily," Angela called gently. Lily's head snapped up, and her eyes widened when she saw Marcus. She froze for a moment, as though afraid to believe he was real. Then, without a word, she jumped off the swing and ran toward him, flinging her arms around his waist. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus crouched down to her level, his arms wrapping around her tightly. "I told you I would, didn't I? A promise is a promise." Lily pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "I thought maybe you forgot." "Not a chance," Marcus said firmly. "I've been working hard to make sure you can come stay with me. But in the meantime, I brought you something." He handed her the gift bag, watching as her face lit up when she saw the hair clip. "It's purple," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Like the blanket you told me about." "That's right," Marcus said. "And those crayons. I thought maybe you could draw some more butterflies for us to add to the collection." She nodded eagerly, her smile growing. For a brief moment, Marcus saw a glimpse of the carefree child she could be, unburdened by fear and uncertainty. Transforming the house. Back at home, Marcus threw himself into transforming the spare bedroom. He spent his evenings painting the walls a soft lavender, carefully avoiding the drips that threatened to mar the smooth finish. He assembled a small bed with butterfly-themed sheets and added a cozy rug in the center of the room. He placed a bookshelf in one corner, filling it with storybooks and coloring supplies. On the opposite wall, he hung a corkboard for Lily's artwork, pinning the torn butterfly drawing he had found at her old house as the first piece. When the room was finally complete, Marcus stood in the doorway, his hands on his hips, surveying his work. It wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with warmth and intention. It was a place where Lily could feel safe. "She's going to love this," he muttered to himself, though a part of him still worried it might not be enough. The hearing. The court hearing to review Marcus's application to foster Lily was both nerve-wracking and emotional. He sat in the courtroom, his hands folded tightly in his lap, as the judge reviewed his file. Angela testified on his behalf, detailing his commitment and the bond he had already formed with Lily. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood and took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I know I'm not what most people would think of as a traditional parent. I don't have a fancy house or a big bank account. But I do have a lot of love to give, and I have the time and energy to make sure Lily has everything she needs. She's been through more than any child should ever have to face, and I want to give her a home where she can heal, grow, and just be a kid again." The judge listened carefully, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Mr. Andrews, fostering a child is a significant responsibility, especially a child with Lily's history. However, it's clear to me that your intentions are genuine and that you have already established a strong bond with her. I'm willing to approve temporary placement, pending further evaluation." Marcus exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." The day she came home. When the day finally arrived for Lily to move in, Marcus couldn't contain his excitement. He stood on the porch, his heart pounding, as Angela's car pulled into the driveway. Lily stepped out hesitantly, clutching her stuffed bear, her wide eyes taking in the house. "Welcome home, kiddo," Marcus said, kneeling to greet her. Lily looked up at him, her lips trembling. "Is it really mine?" "It's ours," Marcus corrected gently. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her inside and down the hall to the spare bedroom. When he opened the door, Lily gasped, her eyes widening as she took in the purple walls, the butterfly sheets, and the bookshelf filled with books. "It's just like I imagined," she whispered, running her fingers over the bedspread. Marcus smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "You deserve a place where you can feel safe, Lily. This is your space, and you can decorate it however you like." Lily turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you, Marcus." He crouched down, resting a hand on her shoulder. "We're a team now, okay? You're not alone anymore." For the first time, Lily threw her arms around his neck without hesitation, her small frame trembling against him. "I love it," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I love it here." And in that moment, Marcus knew that every sleepless night, every form he had filled out, and every doubt he had faced was worth it. They had a long road ahead, but they would face it together, one step, one promise, one day at a time. As Lily settled into her new room, Marcus watched her explore every corner with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She ran her fingers along the bookshelf, her small hand brushing against the spines of books she had yet to read. She traced the edges of the butterfly sheets on the bed and peered out the window, her wide eyes taking in the backyard. Marcus stayed near the doorway, giving her space but ready to answer any questions. "It's all yours, Lily," he said softly. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it." Lily turned to him, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. "Even if I get scared?" she asked. Marcus knelt, meeting her gaze. "Especially if you get scared. You just call for me, okay? I'll always be here." She nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line as if she was trying to hold something back. After a moment, she crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, her small legs swinging. "Can I draw some butterflies now?" Marcus smiled, relieved at the question. "Of course. I'll grab your crayons and some paper." In the days that followed, Marcus worked to establish a routine. Mornings started with breakfast, usually pancakes or scrambled eggs, which Lily seemed to love, and a quiet moment where they planned the day together. Marcus made sure she had time for drawing and playing outside in the backyard, often joining her to kick a ball around or help her catch fireflies in the evenings. Lily, however, still struggled with the quieter moments. At night, when the house was dark and still, she often called out for Marcus. He would find her sitting up in bed, clutching her bear and staring into the shadows. "Can I stay with you?" she asked one night, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, Marcus sat beside her, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "You don't have to be scared, Lily. This house is safe." "But what if it's not?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "What if Daddy finds me?" Marcus's heart ached at the fear etched into her young face. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Your daddy can't hurt you anymore," he said firmly. "The police made sure of that. And if he ever tried, I'd protect you. I promise." Lily's eyes searched his, as if trying to gauge the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded, her small frame relaxing slightly. "Okay." One afternoon, a breakthrough came in the form of a simple question. Marcus had been cleaning up the living room when Lily wandered in, holding her stuffed bear by one arm. "Marcus," she said hesitantly, "can you tell me about your grandma?" He set down the dust cloth and smiled. "My grandma, huh? Sure. She was a lot like you. Brave, strong, and smart. She used to make the best peach cobbler you've ever tasted, and she always had something wise to say, even when I didn't want to hear it." Lily tilted her head. "Did she take care of you?" "She did," Marcus said. "After my parents went to heaven, she raised me, taught me everything I know about being kind and helping others." Lily hugged her bear tighter. Do you think my mommy was kind too?" "I'm sure she was," Marcus said gently. "From everything you've told me, she sounds like an amazing person." "She used to sing to me," Lily said, her voice barely audible. "When I couldn't sleep, she'd sing a song about stars." "What a beautiful memory," Marcus said. "Do you remember how it went?" Lily shook her head. "Not all of it, just a little." "Maybe we can try to remember it together," Marcus offered. "And if we can't, we'll make up a new song." Lily looked up at him, her expression softening. "Okay." That evening, Marcus found himself humming softly as he tucked Lily into bed. She watched him with tired eyes, her bear tucked under one arm. "Marcus," she said, her voice drowsy, "can you sing to me? Like Mommy used to?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of the request. "I'll try, kiddo. But I'm not as good as your mom, I'm sure." Lily smiled faintly. "It's okay. You can make up the words." Marcus began to hum a simple tune, weaving words about stars, purple butterflies, and a garden filled with flowers. His voice was rough and uneven, but Lily's eyelids fluttered close, her breathing evening out as she drifted off to sleep. As Marcus sat there, watching her sleep, he felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over him. For the first time in a long time, he knew exactly where he was meant to be. Challenges and healing. As the weeks turned into months, Lily slowly began to adjust. She started opening up more, sharing stories about her mother and her dreams of becoming an artist. She even began venturing outside on her own, exploring the backyard with growing confidence. But the scars of her past weren't easy to erase. Some nights, the nightmares still came, pulling her from sleep with tears and cries of fear. Marcus would rush to her room, holding her until she calmed down, whispering reassurances that she was safe. One day, during a therapy session arranged by Child Protective Services, Lily spoke openly about her fears for the first time. Marcus sat beside her, listening as she described the moments when she thought no one would ever find her, when she believed she would be trapped forever. "I was so scared," she said, her voice breaking. "But then I heard Marcus outside, and I thought, maybe someone came for me." The therapist nodded encouragingly. "And how did that make you feel, Lily?" Lily looked at Marcus, her eyes shimmering. "Safe." Marcus reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't have to feel scared anymore, Lily. We're in this together." A new beginning. Months later, as spring turned to summer, Marcus received a call from Angela. "The court has approved the transition," she said, her voice warm. "You're officially Lily's foster parent." Marcus sat down heavily, the weight of the moment settling over him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving us this chance." When he told Lily the news, her reaction was quiet but profound. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest. "Does this mean I get to stay here forever?" Marcus smiled, his arms wrapping around her. "It means we get to start forever, Lily. One day at a time." For the first time, Lily laughed, a light, joyful sound that filled the house with a warmth it hadn't known in years. Marcus knew there would still be challenges ahead, but in that moment, he also knew they could face anything as long as they faced it together. Forever begins one day at a time. The day Lily officially became Marcus's foster child felt like the start of something extraordinary. Though the paperwork was finalized and the court's approval was secured, Marcus knew their journey together was just beginning. A new chapter had opened for both of them, one filled with challenges, but also with hope and healing. The first morning as a family. Lily awoke to the smell of pancakes wafting through the house. For a moment, she lay in bed, clutching her stuffed bear, unsure if the warmth she felt was real or part of a dream. Slowly, she climbed out of bed, her bare feet padding across the lavender rug. She peeked into the hallway, following the aroma to the kitchen. Marcus was at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. A small stack was already waiting on the counter, topped with fresh strawberries and whipped cream. He turned and spotted her standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Morning, kiddo," he said with a smile. "You're just in time for breakfast." Lily's eyes darted to the pancakes, then back to Marcus. "Did you make those for me?" "Well, I made them for us," Marcus said, plating a pancake and setting it on the table. "But if you want to claim the best one, I won't stop you." A small smile crept across her face as she took a seat. Marcus sat across from her, watching as she carefully picked up her fork and took a bite. Her eyes widened, and she gave him a thumbs up. "Good, huh?" he said, his grin widening. "I told you I'm a pancake expert." "Better than Daddy's," she said softly, then froze, her fork hovering midair. Marcus leaned forward, his tone gentle. "It's okay to talk about him, Lily, if you want to." She hesitated, then nodded. "He never made breakfast. Mommy did." She used to make smiley faces with the whipped cream. Marcus chuckled. "Sounds like she knew what she was doing. I'll have to step up my game." Lily's smile returned, this time a little brighter. Can we do smiley faces next time? Absolutely, Marcus said. But you have to promise to help. Deal. Deal. Learning to be a kid again. As the days turned into weeks, Lily began to settle into her new life. Marcus enrolled her in a nearby school, where the teachers were kind and patient, and the classroom was filled with bright colors and cheerful laughter. On her first day, Lily clung to Marcus's hand as they walked to her classroom. "What if no one likes me?" she whispered. Marcus knelt beside her, looking her in the eye. "They'd be crazy not to like you. But if anyone gives you a hard time, you let me know, okay? We're a team." She nodded, but her grip on his hand didn't loosen until they reached the door. Marcus watched as she hesitantly stepped inside, her small frame dwarfed by the brightly painted walls. He waited until she found her desk and gave him a quick wave before leaving. When he picked her up that afternoon, she was clutching a piece of paper covered in colorful drawings of butterflies and flowers. "I made this for you," she said shyly, handing it to him. Marcus took the picture, his chest swelling with pride. "This is amazing, Lily. Looks like I've got an artist on my hands." She beamed, her earlier nerves forgotten. Facing the shadows. Despite the progress Lily was making, there were still moments when the shadows of her past loomed large. One night, Marcus was startled awake by the sound of crying. He rushed to Lily's room to find her sitting up in bed, her face buried in her hands. "Lily," he said gently, sitting beside her. "What's wrong?" She looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with fear. "I dreamed Daddy was here. He was yelling, and I couldn't move." Marcus's heart broke at the sight of her trembling. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "It was just a dream, sweetheart. He can't hurt you anymore." "But what if he comes back?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He won't," Marcus said firmly. "The police made sure of that. And even if he tried, I'd never let anything happen to you. You're safe here." Lily clung to him, her small frame shaking. "Promise." Marcus pulled back, looking her in the eye. "I promise, Lily. Always." She nodded, her tears slowing, and he stayed with her until she fell asleep again. Celebrating milestones. As the months passed, Lily began to thrive. She made friends at school, her laughter becoming a regular sound in the house. Marcus made it a point to celebrate every milestone, no matter how small. When she brought home her first spelling test with a gold star, he took her out for ice cream. When she learned to ride a bike without training wheels, he cheered so loudly the neighbors came out to see what was happening. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Mommy can see me now?" Marcus nodded. "I think she can. And I think she's really proud of you." Lily smiled, her gaze returning to the horizon. "I hope so. I want her to know I'm happy now." "She knows," Marcus said softly. "She always knew how special you are." A new tradition. On Lily's first birthday with Marcus, he went all out. The living room was decorated with balloons and streamers, and a butterfly-shaped cake sat on the kitchen counter. He invited her friends from school, along with their parents, creating a house filled with laughter and joy. As Lily blew out her candles, Marcus watched her with a mixture of pride and gratitude. She had come so far from the frightened little girl he had met on that fateful day, and though the road hadn't been easy, it had been worth every step. After the guests left and the house grew quiet, Lily climbed into Marcus's lap, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you for my party," she said sleepily. "It was the best day ever." Marcus kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "You deserve the best, Lily. Always." Looking ahead. That night, as Marcus tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with a question that made his heart skip a beat. "Can I stay with you forever?" she asked. Marcus smiled, brushing her hair back gently. "That's the plan, kiddo. Forever and ever." She nodded, her eyes fluttering closed. I like that. As Marcus turned off the light and closed her door, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had kept his promise. But more importantly, he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: a family. Forever wasn't just a word. It was a promise they would build together, one day at a time. The weeks following Lily's birthday marked a turning point. She was finally beginning to trust that this new life was hers to keep, that Marcus wasn't going anywhere. But even as the days grew brighter, both of them knew the shadows of the past hadn't disappeared completely. They lingered, requiring patience and understanding. A visit to the past. One sunny Saturday, Marcus decided it was time to address something they had both been avoiding. He found Lily in her room, carefully arranging her crayons in a rainbow pattern on her desk. "Hey, kiddo," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "How do you feel about a little trip today?" Lily looked up, her eyes curious. "Where?" "To your old house," Marcus said gently. "Just for a visit. I thought maybe you'd like to pick out a few things to bring here. Only if you're ready, though." Lily hesitated, her hands stilling over the crayons. "Will Daddy be there?" "No," Marcus assured her. "He won't ever be there again. It's just us, and we'll only go if you want to." She thought for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay, but only for a little while." The drive to the old neighborhood was quiet. Lily clutched her stuffed bear, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. Marcus kept the radio on low, glancing at her occasionally to make sure she was okay. When they pulled up to 2487 Maple Street, the sight of the rundown house brought a lump to Marcus's throat. The yard was just as overgrown as before, the windows still covered with tattered blankets. But this time, the house felt empty, its oppressive weight lifted by the absence of James Wilson. Lily hesitated as they stepped out of the truck, her small hand slipping into Marcus. "It looks smaller," she said softly. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Things always do when we come back to them. You're braver now." Together, they walked up the cracked path. Marcus used the key Angela had provided, pushing the creaky door open to reveal the dim, dusty interior. The air was stale, carrying the faint smell of mildew and neglect. Lily's eyes darted around the living room, her grip tightening on Marcus's hand. "It feels like a bad dream," she whispered. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You're safe, Lily. This is just a place now. It doesn't have any power over you." She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Slowly, they moved through the house, Lily's steps hesitant but determined. She paused in the kitchen, her gaze lingering on the table where she used to hide. "I used to sit here for hours," she said. "Sometimes I'd pretend I was invisible." Marcus crouched down to her level. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not ever again." Her eyes met his, and she gave a small, brave smile. "I know." In her old bedroom, Lily carefully chose a few items to take back with her: a framed photo of her mother, a well-worn storybook, and a small box filled with hair ribbons. Marcus helped her carry them to the truck, his heart swelling with pride at her courage. As they drove away, Lily looked back at the house one last time. "I don't think I'll miss it," she said quietly. "You don't have to," Marcus replied. "You've got a new home now." Lily turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think Mommy would be proud of me?" Marcus reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "I know she would. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met." A new beginning. With each passing day, Lily grew more confident. She threw herself into school, making friends and earning high marks in her favorite subjects. Marcus attended every parent-teacher conference, every art show, and every soccer game, cheering louder than anyone else in the crowd. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Lily turned to Marcus with a question that caught him off guard. "Marcus," she said, her voice small but steady, "can I call you Dad?" Marcus felt his throat tighten, emotion flooding through him. He reached out, pulling her into a gentle hug. You can call me whatever you want, kiddo. If Dad feels right to you, then I'd be honored." She hugged him back tightly, her voice muffled against his chest. "It feels right. A forever home." Months later, the day finally came when Marcus could officially adopt Lily. The courtroom was filled with friends and neighbors who had become their extended family. Mrs. Chen from down the street, the Rodriguez kids who waved to Marcus every morning, and even Angela, who had been instrumental in guiding them through the process. Lily stood beside Marcus, holding his hand as the judge addressed them. "Marcus Andrews, do you understand the responsibility of becoming Lily's legal parent and guardian?" "I do," Marcus said firmly, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I've been ready for this since the day I met her." The judge turned to Lily, her expression warm. "And Lily, do you want Marcus to be your dad?" Lily nodded, her eyes bright. "He already is." The judge smiled, her gavel coming down with a soft thud. "Then it's official. Congratulations, Mr. Andrews, and congratulations, Lily." The courtroom erupted into applause, but for Marcus and Lily, the moment felt quiet and profound. They turned to each other, their smiles mirrored, and Marcus lifted her into a hug. "We did it, kiddo," he whispered. "You're officially stuck with me now." Lily laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Good. I wouldn't want it any other way." Looking forward, that night, as they sat together on the couch, Lily leaned against Marcus, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. "Do you think Mommy knows I'm happy now?" she asked. "I think she does," Marcus said softly. "And I think she's smiling down on us, knowing you found your forever home." Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust and love. "Thank you, Dad." Marcus smiled, his heart full. "Thank you, Lily, for letting me be your dad." And as they sat there, the shadows of the past finally fading into the background, Marcus knew their forever had truly begun. One day, one promise, one moment at a time.